Jacinda Ardern is kind of like the original Kamala Harris because Kamala Harris, as you know, was swapped in as the candidate of the Democrats for the latest election 3.5 months before the election, which is pretty unprecedented.
And with Ardern, it was 6 or 7 weeks.
Yeah, so that's even much more. That's so much more quickly. And she didn't win the party votes. She won 36%, but she did form a government. So I was wondering, maybe as a
Yeah.
first question, what exactly happened there? Do you know in terms of both the switch out and in terms of her forming a government?
Well, it's kind of look, it's kind of in the age of the internet, that's ancient friggin' history. Clearly, Little wasn't going to win, and they needed a push. I was actually working for the top party. My short time in politics, I was communications and media director of the top party, and we were on track to get over 5% until the day Jacinda announced, and she sucked every swinging middle ground female voter out of the room. So it was a massive impact. And that's politics. There was nothing illegal about it. And then Winston, of course, did the dirty on all his voters and went with her. And that's part of history.
For anyone who doesn't know, Winston Peters is kind of like the perennial figure in New Zealand politics who's always been around, and I guess he leads potentially the third biggest party in New Zealand sometimes.
Ah, well, potentially the biggest, potentially the second biggest. That's who Winston is. He's a survivor.
And why did he go with Jacinda in that election? Do you know?
You would have to ask him. And they didn't get back in next time. It was seen as a betrayal.
Okay,
And I think because actually, with that generation of National Party people, there was still some bad blood about Winston,
okay.
you
So
know,
his relationships weren't so good with the national.
with that National Party. And look, Bill English won that election. He got more votes than anyone else, but he couldn't do the coalition deal. Yeah, it was really interesting.
Shows how important relationships are to politics
Yeah,
alongside
that's right.
policy.
Mm.
So so then, like, I guess to summarize that, Jacinda really, you think, won in a way that her predecessor couldn't, the guy she replaced,
Yeah,
because
he wasn't getting any cut through. And
right,
we didn't have, God, did we have a woman standing as leader of party? We didn't that election, and female voters were somewhat disengaged.
mm,
So smart politics, nothing illegal
okay,
about it. That's what happens. And she got the votes. She didn't, bribe anyone or, she was just she got enough votes to do a deal with Winston.
she did.
Hmm.
And then fast forwarding 3 years, she didn't need Winston. She was re-elected in a landslide.
Yep.
She won 50.01%
Yeah.
of the
Amazing.
party vote,
Yeah.
and she formed an outright majority.
Hmm.
Um, I was overseas at that time, but I have the impression in retrospect that a lot of the reason why she won was kind of almost a double down on what you said for her first win. It was more her appeal to certain demographics and also her symbolic leadership during COVID. Um,
Hmm.
and because there was this narrative that New Zealand was handling COVID at that time better than other countries.
Oh, absolutely. And that has got to, I don't think you can actually take that election and apply any rules to it. It was such a bizarre time in our history, and that's why it delivered such a bizarre result. I think the last thing people wanted was change. I think the country was screaming to get back to normal, and changing the government out when we all just want to get back to normal was not going to do that. So, a completely isolated election in terms of trend or learning anything from it, to be honest. And I got to say, I picked that weeks beforehand. I can remember going up to moderate a leaders thing. Um, and the only person close to Jacinda in terms of on the stump presence was Winston, but he was out of favour. And I can remember turning around to someone and saying she's going to win a absolute majority. She is just on top of her game. And as a politician, you can recognize when a politician is in the right retail space, and she was.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. I don't know if this would account for very much at all, but I've heard that some people voted for her because she was going to win anyway, and they didn't want any coalition parties like the Greens to have an influence on her government.
Oh, yeah. Oh, look, I haven't seen any research on that, but as I say, that's possible.
Yeah. All right. Well, then she won that outright majority, and I think I don't know how soon this happened, but 2021 to 22, her popularity just kind of I guess it plummeted. I don't know if you'd say that, but she really things started to go downhill, and then she resigned 2 years later in January
Yeah.
2023. So
Yeah.
what went so wrong in her second term?
Um, I think the middle New Zealand got its mojo back, and the level of kind of same thing happened to Helen Clark, actually. The level of fawning sycophancy from the Liberal left just started to turn even neutral people's stomachs. They were thoroughly sick of the beatification of Jacinda Ardern, and a number of issues started to rise to the fore. Freedom of speech issues. The true radical nature of that Labour administration in relation to issues of race in New Zealand started to become very, very clear. Their radical agenda on gender and sexuality issues became clear. And suddenly people started to feel very uncomfortable about the government. And she was most definitely, because of her popularity, what you identified the government as was they were inseparable. And then the internet and got onto her, and she got pretty badly trolled, even by New Zealand standards. And she could read the polling. The internal party polling was that it reached a point where her unpopularity was then having a negative impact on Labour. And as with Andrew Little, they made a calculated decision that she'd leave to improve the chances of the party. And I presume by then she had already teed up her sinecure at Harvard and had her seat on the international gravy train.
Do you think she was that it was like a sort of a decision that she made, or was it sort of one that she accepted from the party?
I am not privileged to the inner workings of the Labour Party management or caucus, but I imagine, as good old Marxists, they would have got together and had a meeting behind closed doors and come up with a strategy.
Okay,
I don't
interesting.
think anyone was going to challenge her. It's sort of like Little. Little threw himself on his own sword, and good old Marxists, it's always for the good of the party, as long as the party takes care of the good of me.